page 64. The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living, by Jeff Volek and Stephen Phinney. An expert guide to making the life-saving benefits of carbohydrate restriction sustainable and enjoyable. Section 2. Perspective. Chapter 3. The Modern History of Carbohydrate Restriction. 3.1. Introduction. They are not respecting the scientific method. In the realm of practical nutrition, by which we mean what people actually eat day in and day out, there is little new in the world. The spate of clinical studies in the last 10 years comparing the effects of low-fat versus low-carbohydrate diets on body weight and blood lipids merely echo much of the work of scientists spanning the last 2 centuries. This, in combination with the empirical experience of aboriginal cultures that lived by hunting or herding, as discussed in the preceding chapter, offers us a rich background upon which to judge the current turmoil surrounding dietary carbohydrate. Stepping back a bit from the current fray, the fact that there is turmoil surrounding the relative roles of dietary fats and carbohydrates is itself rather surprising. After all, modern organic chemistry cut its teeth on nutrient composition, along with dyes and petrochemicals, starting in the mid-1800s. Now, 1.5 centuries later, we should have universal agreement on the definitive information telling us what is best for humans to eat. For example, how could the carbohydrate fat controversy not be resolved after we paid $700 million to perform the Women's Health Initiative, an assessment of both a low-fat diet and hormone replacement, on 50,000 women completed in 2006? The explanation for the ongoing carbohydrate fat controversy is fascinatingly complex, and not surprisingly, it probably has more to do with politics and egos than with science per se. At the crux of our current diet dilemma is the 1977 McGovern Committee's publication Dietary Goals for the United States. This document, primarily produced by a group of lawyers and journalists serving on McGovern's staff, was influenced more by personal opinion than by the technical expertise in the field. While revised guidelines were published by the USDA in 1980, they still exhorted Americans to avoid too much fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol. TB writes, Francis Bacon, if he were alive, would be having heart attacks one after the other, observing this deranged behavior of those who, without having mastery of a subject, try to establish the rules of the scientific game. Opinions are perversion of understanding. It is unworthy and also cretinous that one seeks to introduce his point of view or his opinion in matters that are out of reach, academic preparation or expertise, let alone the mental profile. Volek and Phinney write. In response to this less than scientifically rigorous process, in that same year the Food and Nutrition Board of the National Academy of Sciences released a competing document toward healthful diets that avoided recommendations on fat and cholesterol intakes, focusing instead on maintaining a healthy body weight. Rather than being welcomed into a meaningful discussion, the Food and Nutrition Board's chairperson at the time, Dr. Philip Handler, was vigorously pressured to toe the party line. In an eloquently understated response, giving the following testimony before a congressional committee in 1980, Dr. Handler did a broken bar and then courageously did not a broken bar acquiesce. However tenuous the linkage, however disappointing the various intervention trials, it still seems prudent to propose to the American public that we not only maintain reasonable weights for our height, body structure and age, but also reduce our dietary fat intake significantly, and keep cholesterol intake to a minimum. And, conceivably, you might conclude that it is proper for the federal government to so recommend. On the other hand, you may instead argue, what right has the federal government to propose that the American people conduct a vast nutritional experiment, with themselves as subjects, on the strength of so very little evidence that it will do them any good. Mr. Chairman, resolution of this dilemma turns on a value judgment. The dilemma so posed is not a scientific question, it is a question of ethics, morals, politics. Those who argue either position strongly are expressing their values, they are not making scientific judgments. Now, with the 3 intervening decades lending acuity to our hindsight, Dr. Handler's cautionary position appears to have been precisely correct. Understanding how he and his fellow scientists came to be ignored, and how as a result our population has developed more obesity, diabetes, and many forms of cancer over the last 30 years, is an important lesson that would serve us well to study. One of the clearer voices in the recent dialogue about low-carbohydrate diets is that of Gary Taubes. A renowned, and some might say, courageous, science writer, Taubes weighed in on the topic with a New York Times Magazine article entitled "What If It's Been a Big Fat Lie?" in June 2002. Taubes has subsequently presented in-depth analyses of these dietary controversies in 2 books, Good Calories, Bad Calories, 13, and Why We Get Fat, 14. We highly recommend reading these definitive and carefully referenced books for the full story, but the next few pages will touch on some key points presented by Taubes in his chronicle of the dietary carbohydrate fat controversy. Page 69.